Thank you all for coming to this very, very early panel. I will move to tears. Yeah, this is, it's crazy because this is a book celebration panel. We're supposed to have it before a fancy dinner, but we had our fancy dinner yesterday already. And now with the hangover of the beer, we are having this very early morning gathering of a book panel. And surprisingly, we actually had a virtual panel exactly on January 8th a year ago. So January 8th, 2022. And that panel was recorded and it was published also. There was a summary essay published in Positions Politics. So I believe you have all watched it. So I'm going to just say to the future audience of this recording, please go to YouTube to watch the recording in the event of women, a virtual roundtable. Okay, and this virtual roundtable and the virtual roundtable a year ago and today's in-person roundtable are both sponsored by Modern and Contemporary Chinese Foreign Executive Committee. Liang is here. We might have other committee members joining a little bit late. And we are here to celebrate Tani Barlow's new book published a year ago, January 2022, in the event of women. So during the Zoom meeting a year ago, it was a 90-minute Zoom meeting. We each prepared a speech that is a little bit long for the MLO panel, but today we're going to do a different format. I'm going to have a conversation style of roundtable. As a presider, I'm going to ask questions and then I ask the panelists and the audience to join me in responding to those questions. And before that, I would like to introduce our panelists. So we have a full panel. We have 4 in-person presenters and 3 online presenters. So let me introduce each of them. First, Professor Tani Barlow is George and Nancy Roth Professor of Humanities at Rice University. She is the author of the 2004 book, The Question of Women in Chinese Feminism, and the 2003 book, International Feminism and China. And her new monograph, In the Event of Women, is why we are here today. She is the editor and co-editor of 9 books, including I Myself Am a Woman, Selected Writings of Dingling, New Asian Marxisms, Cinema and Desire, the Cultural Politics of Feminist Marxist, Dai Jinghua, and The Modern Goal, Colonial Modernity and East Asia. Professor Barlow is the founding senior editor of the award-winning journal, Positions Asia Critique. And then second, Rebecca Karl, who is joining us from New York City online, is professor of history at New York University. She is the author of Staging the World, Chinese Nationalism at the Turn of the 20th Century, Mao Zedong and China in 20th Century World, The Magic of Concepts, History and Economic in 20th Century China, and China's Revolutions in the Modern World, which is her newest monograph. Professor Karl is a co-translator with Professor Zhong Xueping, who is also a panelist here, of Cai Xiang's Revolution and Its Narratives, China's Socialist Literary and Cultural Imaginaries, 1949 to 1966. She also co-translated and co-edited with Lydia Liu and Dorothy Kuo, The Birth of Chinese Feminism, Essential Texts in Transnational Theory. And next, Professor Suzy King is Associate Professor of Korean History at Rutgers University. She is a historian and author of the prize-winning book, Everyday Life in the North Korean Revolution, 1949 to 1950. And congratulations, her latest book, Among Women Across the World, North Korea in the Global Cold War, will come out from Cornell University next year. This year, actually, 2023. Yeah. And this work was completed with the support of Fulbright program and the National Endowment for Humanities. She is a senior editor of Positions Asia Critique and serves on editorial boards of a few other important journals. And she is a public scholar and advocate for social justice and peace in Korea with a few other foundations and associations. So next, Online, joining us from Germany, Professor Nicola Spakowski is Professor of Ethnology at the University of Freiburg. Her research is dedicated to 20th century and contemporary China, in particular, concepts of time, approaches to history and the future, feminism, women's studies, and the history of socialism. She is the author of, I'm going to skip the German title because I cannot read that. So the translation, she is the author of Courageously to the Front, Women's Military Participation in Chinese Communist Revolution, 1925 to 1949, and the co-editor of Women in China, the Republican Period in Historical Perspective. And next, joining us in person, Professor Sharon Wesoky is Professor and author E. Brown Chair in Political Science at Allegheny College. Her research interests include Chinese feminist thought in the context of Chinese intellectual criticism, contemporary Chinese political satire, rural Chinese women's organizations, and theoretical perspectives on alternative modernities in China. Professor Wesoky is the author of Chinese Feminism Faces Globalization. She is the co-editor of the volume, Not Just a Laughing Matter, Interdisciplinary Approaches to Political Humor in China. And most recently, she is the editor and the translator of the new book, Chinese Modernity and Socialist Feminist Theory. Congratulations. This book contains works by the leading socialist feminist Song Shaopen. And next, Professor Zhong Xueping joining us from Zoom. She is Professor of Chinese Literature and Culture in the Department of International Literary and Cultural Studies at Tufts University. Her publications include Masculinity Besieged, Issues of Modernity and Male Subjectivity in Chinese Literature of the Late 20th China, and Mainstream Culture Refocused, Television Drama Society, and the Production of Meaning in the Reform Area China. Professor Zhong has co-translated and co-edited Revolution and Its Narratives by Cai Xiang, I have mentioned, and her other co-edited volumes include Some of Us, Chinese Women Growing Up in the Mao Area, 2 volumes of cultural and social transformations, and Debating the Socialist Legacy and Capitalist Globalization in China. And lastly, myself, my name is Zhu Ping. I'm Associate Professor of Chinese Literature at University of Oklahoma, and I served as the acting editor-in-chief of Chinese Literature and Thought today. And I am the author of Gender and Subjectivities in Early 20th Century Chinese Literature and Culture, the co-editor of Maoist Laughter, and Feminisms with Chinese Characteristics. My collaborators are both here. Fei Xiaohui and Wang Zhuyi, they are both here today in the audience. Okay, and again, thank you all for coming. And with that, I think I'll start my questions. So the first question is for all the panelists except Tani, because she is the author of this book. And we have read this book a year ago. Maybe some of us reread the book, but we had different experiences as we expressed in our virtual roundtable, right? Infuriating, and sometimes, for example, excited, right? For the most part, inspired. And today I would like to quiz the panelists because we got a free copy of the book. We need to give something, right, in return. So I would like to invite all panelists except Tani to say in a few sentences, without quoting Tani directly, could you please tell us what this book is about? Just a few sentences, please. So who's going to be the first? I'm going to use alphabetic order. Rebecca, did you volunteer? Okay, go ahead. Oh, Tani will be the judge after we all speak. Oh, yeah. I better get my judge.
Okay, let me just, can everybody in the audience hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so let me just let it be known that I'm not vying for favorite here.
Not vying for what?
Favorite. Right, yes, this is not a competition for Tani's favor, okay, as far as I'm concerned, okay? So that said, though, to my mind, this is a challenging book that requires us to think anew about how what Tani calls social truth is theoretically and historically intertwined with the advent of women as a specific category of life. using the tropes, discourses, and strategies deployed by advertising agencies to present the ideal sociality of women and the saturated womanness of life in China's early 20th century and beyond. Tani exposes how this intertwining was inextricably animated in and through the operations of capital in its local, national, regional, and global instantiations.
Thank you so much.
That would have been the blurb at the back of my, I did blurb the book. So what I did think of the book upon reading it 2 years ago, before it was an actual book in manuscript form, is the blurb that I have at the back of the book. This is the blurb I would have written if I had had a chance to think about it more clearly.
Thank you so much. We have the first volunteer, and oh, by the way, the audience, some of you have read the book. If you want to join the competition, you are free to do so. Yeah. Okay, the second volunteer.
I'll volunteer.
Okay, Suzy, please.
Sure. So this is what I wrote, and I wrote out my answers because I wasn't sure whether I would be coherent otherwise. So here's what I wrote. In my understanding, Tani's use of event denotes a political struggle to establish a new truth. In that sense, the book is the historical process, or it describes the historical process by which woman as a new historical subject comes into view. In the event of women is the emergence of women as a political event that encompasses both the birth of women as biologized beings through evolutionary theories and the birth of women as social beings through sociological theories, and the connection between these two processes so that biology and sociology are not in opposition, as the distinction between sex and gender would come to imply when gender became a category of analysis. And that these, the biology and sociology are not only not in opposition, but were and continue to be part of complementary ontological processes to establish the truth of women.
Thank you so much. This reveals complexity of the book a lot, I believe. Okay, thank you so much. So we have two, number 3, volunteer. Zhong 老师, yeah, I saw you're unmuted, so go ahead, please.
I have 2 versions.
Two versions. That's
The first is a lazy version. The first is the lazy version, which is read the book at least 3 times to find out. And then I have a lame version, which part of which will repeat what I mentioned in our last year's roundtable. Through the theoretical lens of the event, the seemingly disparate practices, both in scholarly and vernacular, I quote, I know I sometimes I have to break the rule, vernacular theorization, and in commercialization of modern products. I don't know if I should actually reread it. The seemingly disparate practices, both in such practices of scholarly theorization and in commercialization of modern products, they are brought together to the fore and examined as part of the shaping forces in the production of certain truth of women in the colonial modern China. The event in question was part of the bourgeois universalism and its encroachment in the non-Western countries and societies by way of imperialism, colonialism, capitalist market expansion, and some of whose ideas and practices were nevertheless actively received and appropriated by modern Chinese reformists, revolutionaries, and then incipient modern urbanites. In the event of women in this sense is simultaneously contextually specific and conceptually expansive when the question of women or question of woman in modern China becomes the political event of women with Chinese characteristics, if you will, given its modern history in the modern world and the struggles therein. And I want to end with repeating one point that I made last year, which is in this sense, I think that Tani's study, in Tani's study, we find the constitutive forces of the event to be more modernizing than revolutionizing, albeit mixed with revolutionary possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhong 老师. Thank you. It's definitely necessary to read it twice. And just like we need to read the book 3 times, probably I'll find another chance to let you read that a third time. Thank you so much. Yeah, so
I can go.
Sharon?
Mine's
Yeah.
a little bit different from Suzy's, I think.
Okay.
Maybe also different from Professor Zhong.
Can you hear?
I'm very briefly, mine's very brief. I'm just defining in the event of women. So it's the formation of women as a political subject as a constituent event of modernity, which is a quote from Tani, but one in which there is considerable discord regarding how it constitutes which modernity, whether that is modified or revolutionary.
Can you hear on the Zoom? Yes, great, great. I think it's also in the subcaption. So thank you so much. It's a very compact summary of the book. Yeah, so we have 2 more. Nicola, do you want to go first? And I'll go after you. Thank you.
Yeah, I first would like to join to share with you the nice words created by this transcript. So Professor Tani Barlow is alternatively Tony Barlow. Tony Barlow or Professor Bottle.
Last night, Nicola, I was Professor Bottle last night.
Professor
It was a bottle of beer.
So I can't add anything. I found Rebecca perfect already. So what should I say? The book is about the scientific discovery of the mammal origins of social evolution, the physiological nature of women, their equality yet difference, and the dissemination of this truth into all kinds of high and low-brow thought, transnational commercial activities, and political contestations.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'll go the last, but doesn't mean I will have your favor. So please be fair in your judgment later. So yeah, so mine is like a slogan, I think, and it's very short. In the event of women is a guide of the materialist history, a theory of gender. It tells us that a woman can be, will be, and must be made and remade through voluntary actions in material history until she becomes man's equivalent. So that's my slogan. Yeah. So any audience care to join the competition? They're not ready. They're not prepared at all. So this is really a cold call. Okay. I see some no from the audience.
Our cheating machines.
We cheated in a way. Yes. Yeah. So Tani, please tell me what you think.
Well, I'm going to choose a favorite, but not for the reasons
Right.
you laid out. Okay. I think that all of these statements help me to understand my own book. There's always a joke about writers. Once you say goodbye to your book, then you re-encounter it as a strange object having nothing to do with you. And you say, oh my God, this is what I was doing. So I want to thank Xueping. Of course, her statement was brilliant, but I want to say that it is because of her intelligence, her drive, and her organizing skill that she published her first really amazing book, and then has gone on to make sure to organize many things for us to participate in. So as an elder scholar, it makes me extremely happy to see younger scholars coming in to take up the burden, which, as we all know, is a considerable burden. So I nominate and elect Xueping.
Thank you so much. That's a different reason. That's truly a different reason. Yeah, but I like all the other statements. It's not the work that's the winner. The statements. Yeah, yeah. So thank you so much. Okay, with that we move to the next question, and that question.
Sorry, Ping, I just wanted to underline that one of the things that all of us, I mean, just to draw some, we all had different sort of emphases, but one of the things that all of us really did think about in relation to Tani's book is how she complicates everything for us, you know, not only the reading experience, which is complex, but how all of the processes that she undertakes to think about force us to complicate our thinking, which I think is, you know, one of the things that all of us take away from the book, whether we're happy about having to work so hard or not. We ultimately, I think we all found it pretty rewarding. So I just wanted to make an underline under one of the common threads that happened through all of our discussions. That's it. Sorry.
It's true. It's an incredibly rich book, and we can take so many different things from it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so next question is for Tani only. In this book, you have followed the Benjaminian model by reading history against the grain to reach out the continuous fight over gender that had become more intense in the with the discovery of physiological sciences in the modern period. So in this methodological, is this methodology applicable to other categories, such as, can you envision new studies, such as in the event of the proletarian, or in the event of yellow race, or in the event of the youth?
Thank you for this question. It came up last year when we were debating, I know, and I've had occasion to think about it a lot. It occurs to me that this is a question that is easier for historians to deal with, because when all is said and done, I really am engaged in a history project. When Nicola and Rebecca made clear the complications that go into this kind of work, I am complicating historical readings. And as has been pointed out by many people, this book does not have a narrative. This book is not narrative in its structure. It is a debate about history. And for addressing the question of how to figure out what an event is, we can look to European historiography. Now, in the past, in historical innovation in European history, we got descriptive notions of, for example, I remember as a graduate student learning that in the past, before the modern era, children were considered little adults. And this stuck with me because at the time I found this to be a remarkable suggestion. And the historian had gathered massive amounts of visual evidence to make this point. And then the ultimate point was, and then there was the invention, which is the term that we used to use, the invention of childhood, or the invention of race, or the invention of so many different things. Now, I think that historians sort of don't think about that very much or very deeply anymore, but it exists as a predicate to the kind of work I do. Now, within that kind of work, when you say something is invented, what you're actually saying is it didn't exist before, and now it seems like a truth. How could people in the past not understand that children are children because they haven't reached puberty yet, they haven't had time to mature, et cetera. Now, I would say that's a biological understanding of human development, but the point being that when we think about events, historians must think about what is more important than something else. I don't want to write a history of childhood because from my point of view, it's not central to how history makes changes. Now, I also don't want to write a history of in the event of capital, right? Because first of all, it's not really in my sort of provisional understanding evental, because an event is a political action installing a new truth. So in defining event as being partly human installed, I want to shift the way we understand history from shit happens to the idea that people make shit happen, but only under specific and given conditions. So to address the question of whether there could just be events all over the place, or whether even you want to take up the problem of the events, I would say to the historians, well, what do you think? What, in your judgment as a highly educated historian, is the most significant part of modernity? For me, throughout my career, a defining element of modernity per se, that is across the board, has been the sudden popping out of women as a subject. I do this through Chinese texts and my understanding of the historiography of Chinese history, because that's what I understand. I don't know very much about other kinds of history, but I don't doubt that one could also find the event of women in other national and so-called transnational histories. So the issue of going from a category, that is things that you see in a document, to an event requires two things. One is judging that the event in question is central to change, and the other one is human installation in political action. Now, that being said, there has been a lot of debate among historians and literary critics, philosophers and theorists, particularly people who come out of the psychoanalytical wing of so-called theory, about how new things come into the world. And this question of how new things come into the world is very difficult for historians, because we can always find predicates. We can always say, well, that's not new. They were doing that in the 18th century or the 15th century or the Shang Dynasty, or the Neolithic people were also doing the same thing, which of course is not at all helpful, and actually probably is not even close to being true. So the second, or the underlying issue of eventality must be, does it bring something new into the world? Now, I wanted also to briefly mention the side of this which causes, I think, the most problems, both for me and for my readers, who jokingly or in a high state of irritation have to read this book more than once. And that is because I am a historian who refuses to read documents except through what is new. That is to say, you will notice that in my previous work, I was debating with Gayatri Spivak. And in this book, I am debating with Alain Batu. And in the book itself, I am debating with early Marxist theories about capital. And ideas about how colonial modernity and modern capital are changing Shanghai, for example. I have a whole subsection on what these people are thinking about. So I must approach, from my own perspective, I must approach historical problems through the thinking that was going on among people who were alive at that time. That's both a strength and a weakness of my way of doing history. So I'm going to point out that in the event of women has philosophical implications, and I have drawn on the following feminist philosophers. Simone de Beauvoir, Luce Irigaray, and the rest of the French feminists, Dai Jinhua, and people who are either anti-feminists or just plain stupid philosophers who left themselves open to a feminist critique, and that would be Alain Badiou. So I can envision scholarship taking up the problem of the event. This is a problem for historians in general, and a classic issue is what was the French Revolution, or was there a French Revolution, which is a joke about eventality. Is this really an event, or was this made up by historiographers after some sort of strange disorganized rebellion? I think that answers the question that you posed.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, more than enough. Thank you so much for the answer. Yeah. Yeah. And then next question is actually for everyone, because last year when we had the virtual roundtable, there was a question that was unanswered. It was raised by Nicola. Why was there so much woman in Chinese culture, right? Or in East Asian culture? So today we can maybe try to attack that question again. Why was there so much woman, right, in the modern period? So yes, who's?
I'll go.
Yeah, Suzy.
Well, I was willing to volunteer because I feel like in some ways, and maybe it's because I read the question that would be posed to Tani just now, but it dovetails really well with Tani's comments, which I'm so glad that there's going to be a recording because that was so illuminating for me. So this is what I wrote to this question. So I realize the question isn't framed as why so much more women than X, but I think it's worth pointing out that the event of women was not at the expense of other events, in the sense that those historically marginalized as peasants, commoners, the undesirables, came to the foreground in the modern period in ways they had not before as historical agents. And this was not limited to China or East Asia. The centrality of the woman question globally had to do with exactly what Tani tracked in the event of women. And I should say also, you know, the earlier work that she did in collaboration with others on the modern girl around the world, I think is also in that vein. But but essentially the event of women is the newly discovered truth about biological and social reproduction, in which women are absolutely necessary. But since sex difference is still being contested and debated to this day, and in fact, a couple of years ago, I heard this amazing Radio Lab. It's a podcast for those of you that are into podcasts, but a Radio Lab story titled Gonads. And it was essentially about how, you know, there's this long kind of, I think it's still being taught in schools about how, you know, the X and Y chromosomes determine the sex of the fetus and all of these, or the, you know, human being. But they're discovering that basically these, even the smaller cells within those chromosomes have the capacity to essentially change. Yeah, it's actually remarkable, but there's another gene that basically suppresses the capacity to change. And the way that the biologists are explaining this right now is that it's basically a remnant from the fact that, you know, we are evolved from fish, and the fish continue to have this capacity to be able to change their sex depending on their environment in order to be able to reproduce. So if, let's say there's a whole colony of there's one male and a colony of female fish that's mating with the male fish, if the male should suddenly catastrophically be eaten and disappear, that another female fish would basically emerge and become a male fish. Yeah, I mean, absolutely cool. And people might assume that this doesn't happen very often, that it's like only a certain minor numbers of fish that do this, but it's actually extremely common. So in any case, I'm sorry that was a little bit of a digression, but in other words, the exactly what Tani points out in the book about, this debate about sex difference continuing to be a major mystery is absolutely true. The event of women to be differentiated from, if in fact there was an event of man, is an ongoing political struggle, particularly acute in nation building moments, with the imperative to define the role of members of political subjects and citizens in the modern state. This process is fraught in Asia, since what is considered modern, quote, gets mistakenly identified with the West or the foreign, and therefore the event of women, that is the emergence of women as modern subjects, is a contested subject from the get-go, which is why I think it's so pervasive to address the question directly.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that really opens up the horizon for looking at the question. So I'm going to go to the next volunteer to see if we have a different take of the question. Rebecca, do you want to?
No, I was going to suggest, since this, that Nicola, since it came out of the roundtable from you originally, that maybe you had something that you had in mind about this, since I agree with Suzy. It's not that, China is uniquely has, like, as a colleague of mine once at NYU history department looked around and said, I'm drowning in women. And because there were too many hires, female professors, and he found that he was suffocating from being. So I'm assuming that the issue isn't that there aren't like too many women, it's in China or whatever. But I wondered. But I wondered, Nicola, what your initial what prompted that remark from you?
I can't give the answer because I asked the question. I asked the question because I didn't know. Now, in my impression, I'm a historian of communist revolution. So I'm a social historian, and woman is everywhere, right? So it's not just a marginal add-on revolutionary activities, but it's everywhere. And that's why I asked the question. Now, Tani gave us with the book a very good answer, and Suzy with putting women in the light of modernity also gave us a very good answer. I can't say anything about East Asia or about culture. I just find that the Chinese Revolution is very much a social revolution. So it's not so much about political institutions, but it's about transforming society, transforming people, transforming social relations. And this would be my point of departure when trying to find an answer to the question. The question then would be transformed into, why is it a social revolution so much more than in other places? The need to transform people. The need to understand the nature of man in a gender dimension.
Yeah.
So Nicola, I would then ask you to, I'm sorry to just, because this is provocative for me and I'm interested. How would you put your, I mean, since I agree with both you and with Tani, and yet I think that you're saying slightly different things. How would you put your social relations into conversation with Tani's social truth?
Social revolution.
That's a very good question. So the point is, I mean, Tani and I do have conversations, but her background is much more a philosophical one than mine is. Mine is much more a social practice one, right? So I'm interested in how ideas transform into social practice, habitus, and so forth. So I can't give you an answer, Rebecca. It's just, we are converging at a point where an idea comes, Tani looks at the idea and I look much more at the actions that are built upon an idea without people realizing that there is an idea behind the action they take.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in part, and Tani, I'd like to bring you in here if possible, is because, you know, one of the difficulties I had with the book, while I'm absolutely persuaded about the question of social truth, it seems to flatten the historical or temporality, then, that once installed, then it remains as a truth. Whereas Nicola, with the social transforming social relations, that's an ongoing, ever ongoing process that's always about, there's no truth there. There's just, there's historical contingency and historical practice. And so one of the problems, and I think I brought this up in the roundtable back last year in our anti-January 6th, January 8th event, was about the problem of the flattening of the temporality that is perhaps, and I know Tani doesn't believe that nothing changes once something is installed. I know that's true, but what does social truth as a way of thinking about this? How does that install a sort of temporal endpoint or stopping point rather than a starting point? And I just want, that's what the interest for me is about the social relation versus the social truth. They don't have to be in conflict or antagonistic to one another. I just wonder how to put them into a better conversation. And that's, you know, nobody has to respond. That's that was my answer to this, or my thinking about this question, is not that women are more quantifiably excessive in China or anywhere else, or why is there so much woman, is that what happens to the social truth of woman when social relations are revolutionarily transformed? Or does that truth just, as we know, just never, or as we think, you know, what do we think about that? Anyway, I've digressed too.
I'm going to jump in and say that I think this is an enormously fruitful debate. And I think I could do what I did, but I'm still here, and I'm still extremely interested in how, I mean, Rebecca and some of her former graduate students organized a reading group for ACLS on socialism as in theory. And some of our debate very recently had to do with a version of this question, which is everyone reading the documents laid out for us. Zhou Yang and you name them, they were all there. All of us understood the significance of women in these debates during Cultural Revolution. And many of the male comrades in this group are feminists. However, the problem then became, how do you actually describe social relationships when you put women and men as political subjects into a revolutionary context? And that became a really big problem. So I think what Nicola and Rebecca are raising is a super big and fascinating next step problem.
Yeah, and if I can add something, I totally agree with Suzy. The woman question that Tani discussed in the book is unnational or non-national, right? But there's something interesting about the modern Chinese culture as well, right? So actually, in my first book, I proposed a notion. It's called the feminine at large. So it's because under the colonial sex gender system, the imagination of the masculine actually was prohibited, right? Because the China was feminized in the first place under the male gaze. So in light of that, the feminine became the realm of freedom. It was more malleable and flexible. So there was, because of this, there was more imagination of the feminine, of the woman in modern Chinese culture. So that might add a little bit response to the to Nicola's question, I think, but it's really not a national phenomenon. I think in every culture there's something similar. Yes. Okay. Any additions?
Can I just add quickly, I think to use the Albertarian term that Tani uses in her book, it's overdetermined, right? And so the ways that Tani shows how this occurred, but one thing that interests me with this question that I think speaks back to the previous question, and it also kind of moves us into the next question about LGBTQ issues, is like, how do particular dimensions of identity become politically salient in terms of how people think about their political subjectivity, right? So why is gender so much more salient than class, for example, which is still very much the case, I would think, in contemporary politics, right? And so understanding the processes that lead us to that, which then speaks us back to like why there isn't an event in the proletariat, for example, perhaps. And so there's, you know, or why, you know, national identity becomes so much more salient than class identity. As somebody who's super interested in socialism, that's always my question, like, why do we keep getting screwed by capitalism over and over again? Well, maybe that's a simplistic answer to that question, but it's maybe a piece of it. So the ways that the overdetermination of gender as a salient political identity, political category keeps it moving forward, which also I think maybe Rebecca's question about why it's still, maybe it doesn't have an endpoint yet. Maybe it's still ongoing.
Thank you. So, Zhong, do you want to respond? Or
Just quickly, if I
Yeah.
heard, I didn't hear Sharon clearly, but I did hear the word class. Is that the word?
Yes.
Okay, that's good, because I do think I just want to add one point by saying certainly it's not about China at all alone, because I did mention in an article that I wrote recently about the sort of comparison between China and India after India's sort of independence and China's 1949 revolution. And there was so much women in both cases. We were looking at the cinemas. And so the comparative examination demonstrates that, you know, in both cases, you do have this so-called influences of modernity. To be specific, I would call it a bourgeois kind of a universalism, influencing much parts of the world, but differences in the nature of the social political struggles in these two different sort of places, you call them nations or countries and whatnot, actually condition whether or not the presence of so much women was actually associated with a goal towards liberation or towards something else. So I do think so much women can still be analyzed in class terms in some, you know, in those other very important categories, I think. Just also to respond to everybody, Rebecca, Nicola, and Sharon, and Tani, and everybody, it just occurred to me.
thank you. Yeah, so we will be speeding up a little bit. So I'll select the questions we prepared because we need to leave some time for the questions from the audience. But since Sharon already mentioned, the next question is about LGBTQ. And actually right now, there's a Sinophone Queer Studies panel ongoing, which is too bad for the planning, MLA planning. So I'm going to ask Tani to address briefly the next question. What would be the role of the LGBTQ plus movement in the event of women?
This one was a hard one for me to think about, which means it's a great question. And it seemed to me that if one accepts my hypothesis that an eventual woman is politically installed by a bourgeois class as a medical issue, as a biophysical reality, that's the truth part, then perhaps debates over women's sexuality or sexuality per se become adjunct to the event of women. Now, I say that because I don't think highly of Foucault's history of sexuality. I think it was extremely useful to think with, but he has no way of understanding human sexuality, even hypothetically, in the sense that he was a stone misogynist who simply could not grasp female sexuality as an actual desire full of praxis, to put it that way. So he has a lot of trouble going beyond an explanation and a provocation about how sexuality is historically expressed. That being said, it was nice, but my sense is that we need to not go back to this nonsense. I would argue that once the biophysicality of the human being, with its indeterminate sexuality, this goes to Suzy's issue and the issue that Xueping raised, now that scientists have taken a mosaic individual, separated out X and Y, and created masculine or male and female individual from the same person. There must be ways of pulling sexuality into these discoveries about the question of what is the human mammal. That would suggest that our discussions about the freedom to choose our erotic partners come from what is native to human beings. Consequently, this is a natural rights argument. So LGBTQ plus becomes a central argument for defining the limit of our insistence on natural rights.
Thank you so much for the answer. And because we have 20 minutes left, about 19 minutes left, so I'm going to ask the audience if you have questions. It's time to throw your questions at us. And if you need a few more minutes, we can do more questions. We have a few more questions on our list. We were over prepared, it seems, but yeah, I'd like to take audience questions for now. Yeah. Yeah, Faye, please.
Sorry, I guess I'm going to throw some
Yell at us.
rudimentary question already. So first of all, thank you to Professor Zhu and all the speakers for the exciting panel. So
Louder, clearly. Maybe you can come.
Okay. I'm taking off my mask and
It's okay.
speaking right to your face, and okay. So first of all, thanks to Professor Zhu and also to all the speakers in person and remote for this very exciting panel, and congratulations again, Professor Barlow, for just read it during my winter break holiday season. And I think I will need to reread it
3 times.
3 times.
Yeah.
Okay. At least those pages with post-it tabs. Okay, so and I think this idea of the eventual quality of the truth is very useful for me, because my next project is not about women coming into view, but about women coming into hearing. So it's more about the sound events, so women's sound practice as a social practice, as an event to make change. Not only change our perception of the world, but change our world in a sense. So this panel is super helpful for me to get a better understanding of this book. And then my question is, so I guess I can kind of see the intellectual trajectory, of this book, following the previous projects of modern girl around the world. So I think, so I agree with everyone, reading this book is very challenging and probably infuriating, to quote Professor Karl, but also humbling and liberating. Because I think it kind of liberated the event of women from the constraints of the nation state, and also area studies, and recenters it in this context of global modernity. So, corporate imperialism, colonial modernity, and vernacular sociology, and commodity ephemera, if I pronounced that correctly, so all those things are truly liberating for all of us, and for the discipline. Yeah. So I find that very stimulating for me. And then I remember towards the end of the book, I think it's at the end of the last chapter 6, right? You mentioned very briefly, so the heavy influence of Chinese communist feminism on the US second wave feminism, right? But then you talk about, now probably you kind of predicted the change in perception of this abandoned historical project. But probably, with the changing situation in today's world, yeah, there might be some new change. And also because I think it's very important, and I think all the panelists also mentioned that, to understand today's world, we need to look back at the history to see, what kind of theoretical and also practical political implications of this kind of abandoned historical project holds for our understanding of the present in today's world. And also both Ping and Tani, both of you mentioned, this is like a continuous struggle. The fight is never over. So I'd like to hear more about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Clay.
That was wonderful.
So shall we take all questions? And okay, are there any? Yes, Sujia, come here, please.
First, I'll really thank Xueping to organize such a wonderful event. And I bought the book yesterday and really excited to see the book, and also really excited to know there is this event coming on. So I just want to be brief. I don't want to take the time from the other audience time. So I think I like Professor Xiao's question also, and I just want to be more specific because I realize that right now we have this in China, we have this women's economy that especially in media and TV show and film, it seems that the cultural production are actually targeting the women to consider women as a very major consumers and, shape the culture in a very transforming way compared to, the time Tani was writing in the book. So I just wonder, to continue the question, if you can specifically address this women economy in the cultural production in China right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujia. Do we have more questions from the audience? Okay, Liang, yeah, come here, please.
Not a real question. I'm yet to read the book, I have to confess. I just got it at the event of the MLA. But I think I'm really interested in just the title itself. So we interchangeably seem to be using women and women constantly in the panel and in our discussions. That's one question about the singular and plural. The second question is the strength of not needing a subtitle. I'm really I think every one of us struggle with that, especially younger junior scholars, and they have to be forced to identify their subject matter, their area of study, their linguistic specialty. also the press negotiates with you, like how do you search for the book? And so this power, strength, will to not limit yourself as a China specialist or aero studies, that's related to the debate or the discussion we already have, is very important. So I just want to highlight that, and we can have we can continue to talk about this, this universality, of course, versus local sort of the constraints of the ghetto, the ethnic prefix, and all the problems with it. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. May I address Leon's point very quickly? This
Here you
is
go.
super important, and I urge all younger scholars to really fight with your press. Try to take China out of the title, unless it's absolutely pertinent. See if you can universalize this. I told the press, do not use red on this cover. I had to fight to get this image here. And I got the cover image, and I was so angry. So I wrote them and said, I told you explicitly, no red, Chinese red, revolutionary red, Chinese red, communist, etc. And they said, it's not red, it's coral.
Well, this is a beautiful cover.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah.
It's okay, but this speaks directly to the issue that we are ghettoized even when we try our hardest not to be. So I urge you to keep pressuring them. You will fail a lot. I have failed so many times over the years to do this that it's kind of ridiculous. Celebrate the achievements, but keep pushing.
Yeah.
Time is not over.
It's not over.
Yeah, in the event of book title.
It's about-
Yeah. So, would you like to address the other two questions raised by Fei and Sijia?
I'm going to do it really quickly so
Mhm.
that we have extra time. I think this breaks down into a theme that's already come up, that the book is addressing both the revolutionary possibilities and the issue of commodity culture. And what I did not say explicitly, but felt throughout this process, is that the tragedy for feminism is that it arises out of capitalism, that it's the commodification of everyday life that feeds into the so-called autonomy of women. If we look at the longue durée, then the problem becomes, as I tried to point out in chapter 6, that we're mired in the problem of how to make revolutionary change with this indebtedness to the commodification of femininity. Oh, the singular and plural thing.
Yeah.
I just do that to mess with people. It's another way in which, if I do not translate 女性,妇女, 女人, all of these things into 2 words, we just throw it back on non-Chinese speakers that you can get along just fine with a word that is both singular and plural. Just like you can get along just fine with ta.
Yeah.
The decision to put the plural on the title is
Just messing with you. It's bad English, not idiomatic.
Actually, the 3 questioners, they both, they all mentioned how Tani pushed the boundaries in this book, right? Actually, I prepared that question, so I'm going to, maybe we can, we don't have to each address that question, but who would like to talk about how Tani, pushed boundaries? Rebecca, please.
Yeah, I like this question, and I liked whoever it was who was talking about liberating.
Fei Xiaohui.
Right, okay, Xiaofei, that was talking about liberating, because on the one hand, I don't think either Tani or I are interested in saving history for disciplinarity.
Oh,
Okay, you know, and I think because one of the things that you asked,
Nicola.
or Nicola, or any of us really are interested in saving our disciplines from their own idiocies. I mean, that's not what we're doing here. And so we each, and I'll just talk about Tani and myself and all of us here on this panel, though, have in our own way engaged professionally and intellectually in trying to explode history in its more conventional disciplinary forms and concerns. And so I think that the word to use, even though it's tainted in Chinese, liberation, is a much better word than saving, because we know people have tried to save China from this, that, and the next. We know that people have tried to save history from this, that, and the next. I think none of us is interested in doing those things as a disciplinary form. I mean, we fight our discipline pretty strongly, and I think that the discussion of how this book really is anti-disciplinary and non-disciplinary is a better way of situating it than, but that's not to say that it doesn't have implications for history. And what I want to say about that is, while Tani and I also disagree on many things about narrative temporality and so on and so forth, which we've discussed endlessly amongst the two of us and in various other ways, and we can certainly do that at some other point, and we will continue doing that. But I think what's obvious here is that the categories and processes that Tani puts so much pressure on in this and consistently in her other work, event, sociality, truth, women, woman, politics, subject, object, China, universal, capitalism, universal, the advertising industry, and so on and so forth, are central to the discipline and various intellectual projects that fall under the rubric of history. And so that it seems to me that without thinking history as a disciplinary form, we have to grapple with how we need, as scholars who use words and concepts and ideas, how we have to denaturalize our categories of thought while interrogating how those categories come to be stabilized in intricate and ultimately contingent, but historically necessary fashion. And I think that that's one of the things that I always take from my encounters with Tani, whether in person, virtually, or on the page. So that's what I wanted to say about that. I don't think this is about saving disciplines or about inducing our disciplinary stodgy colleagues to take us or anything seriously. This is aimed at folks like the newer folks, folks who still have whose brains are still pliable and are still thinking rather than entrenched.
Thank you so much. Wonderful input. So anyone else from the panelists you want to talk about disciplinary? Yeah.
Well, I totally agree. I totally agree with what Rebecca has said. But having, so in other words, I don't think necessarily that the pushback is against our field, whether that's history or area studies. But I do think that the book has the book basically disturbs the field of women and gender studies in ways that's really productive in my mind. And I think, because the kind of centrality or the hegemony that Joan Scott's work has, and the gender as a category of analysis. And I have to say, like, for so many years, I always began my gender and careers class with that reading, but it got to a point where I was deeply dissatisfied and I wanted something else to start with. And I'm just like so pleased that this book is available. And it actually, just even to be able to assign the introduction, where Tani specifically targets Joan Scott's work, and I think it's so rich there. So this is what I wrote about this is Joan Scott called for gender as a category of historical analysis, and the emergence of gender studies as a discipline had the unintended political effect of displacing women in feminist theorizing and depoliticizing women as historical subjects. And I feel like in some ways I wasn't quite able to diagnose what my dissatisfaction with Scott was. And reading this book was so liberating for me in that sense. So yeah, so at least for the study of women and gender studies, I think it's kind of like we needed a book that really would tackle this from a non-Western hegemonic viewpoint, and it does so much to disturb the discipline in ways that I think was absolutely necessary. So thank you.
Thank you, Suzy.
I mean, I'll just speak very briefly over here, hanging on a thread as somebody who teaches in a political science department. That there's so much in this book that's political, either explicitly or implicitly, but most political scientists would not recognize it. I don't they wouldn't know what to do with it. And that is obviously to the detriment of political science, whatever the hell political science is. And so, yeah, I appreciate that so much. And so thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon and Nicola.
Yeah, just briefly, I would like to come back to the China on the title or not China on the title question, and the question of area studies and what China actually means and what we do as China studies scholars. And I think Tani has done a tremendous work on unpacking the box of China, which we are all forced to work on, right? So with showing us how transnational these developments are, starting with colonialism's career and so forth, but then also with this book, like looking at business history in a transnational perspective. And I find this extremely important, extremely stimulating also for our contemporary discussions of China. So I'm very much troubled by this idea of China's rise, right? Yeah. So the question is, who is China? Who is rising? We are rising, so we are part of the story. And I find it so extremely important to highlight our part in the story. Yes. And I mean, who is rising? The German car industry is rising. Western consumers have been rising through the rise of China. So get everybody in the picture. And I find this is a very hard job, and you did an excellent job in unpacking the China box, I have to say. And I find it very hard to be recognized as a China studies scholar. I know that that's what I'm expected to speak about. And my message to my audience is always we are part of this narrative. We are part of the story. And I find that Tani is very excellent at bringing home this message.
Thank you, Nicola. We are 1 minute behind, but Zhong Laoshi, would you like to say a word?
Oh, I actually echo all the points that have been made, and well, I guess that in many ways the disciplinary dimension of the expansion, it seems to me, is from Tani's book, is important in that precisely the kind of influences already are very sort of, in some ways, the original, early 20th century, in some ways were already quite, marked by colonial imperialism and all of that. And then so to unpack, and throughout the history since then, what has happened in Asia or in China or in other parts of the world, through a kind of a formulating the issues and so on, is very important, I think. But I would still add an important note to the revolutionary sort of histories in China that must be actually that have been pushed back by all forces that actually need to be brought back into the event, if you will.
Yes, okay. We are behind. The last two questions we didn't get to cover. There, what's your favorite quote from this book? And what is the most difficult word that you need to look up dictionary from the book? We'll send those answers to Tani directly. Definitely.
Please do.
Yeah,
Well, help me get
wow.
better.
Thank you so much for coming. I had lots of fun having this conversation, and thank you for the remote presenter, for the in-person presenter, for the in-person audience. Everything was perfect. This was a great event of women, right? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ping, for
Thank you.
organizing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have fun in San Francisco. Go out and party.
Yeah.
right.
Bye bye.
Bye, you guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.